In the summer of 1931, life was good for Junior Lemley. Though only 23 years old, he was the head of all movie production for Universal Pictures, and under his reign the studio flourished. So much so, he was about to be bestowed with the greatest honor a young executive can receive in Hollywood, a promotion to vice president of the entire company. What's more, Carl Laemmle, his father and founder of the studio, was returning to California for the first time in years to personally present the honor to his son, or so Junior thought. It's Alive by Julian David Stone is a thrilling and vibrant portrait of 1930s Hollywood centered around the chaotic and exciting days just before the filming of the beloved cult classic film Frankenstein. Woven with hopeful passion, emotional vulnerability, staunch determination, and creative fulfillment, listeners will be swept along with breathless cinematic pace through events that will not only change the lives of everyone involved, but Hollywood itself. I talked to Julian David Stone about his new book, It's Alive. Julian David Stone. Now, your new book is called It's Alive, and it's a novel, it's a work of fiction. We normally don't have works of fiction on the show because it's books about classic Hollywood and movies and things of that nature. But your book, your novel, it's different than your normal novel. You have written a novel about the making of the movie Frankenstein.
That is correct.
Now, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say it's historical fiction. So, yes, it is a work of fiction, but I'd like to say it is based on a lot of research and a lot of facts. And of course, there's embellishments like any work of fiction, but I try to stay as close as I can when I can to the actual facts.
Exactly. And there's a lot, and this is something that people I don't think realize, even when it comes to works of fiction, any work of fiction, is that everything's based in truth. Whether it be a mystery novel or whether it be like a historical fiction like yours. Um, and if you're not familiar with the 1931 version of the movie Frankenstein, you kind of give a peek behind the making of it. And tell me a little bit about your research, the research that went into this book.
Sure. So, yeah, I tell the story of the 3 days leading up to the beginning of filming on Frankenstein. And sort of contrary to, everybody knows that Boris Karloff was Frankenstein, but based on the historical record, there was a lot of back and forth where it might not have been Karloff, it might have been Bela Lugosi, and there was a lot of turmoil leading into the production, which often happens on a film. Uh, in terms of research, I did a ton of it. I started by first really sort of taking a deep dive into the Universal films and studying them and reading everything I could. I particularly liked to look at contemporary stuff from the time. I read a lot of trade magazines from 1931, the photo magazines or the movie magazines that were out there, and I also read the Los Angeles Times, anything I could get my hands on. And then the story was coming together, but it wasn't quite working. And that's when I decided that I had to go even wider with my research. And I made a point of watching pretty much any film I could find from 1930 and 1931. And that's what really, when I moved it beyond just Universal's output to everything that was being made, is when the story really opened up. Because even though it's a story about Universal monsters and the making of Frankenstein, it's about what Hollywood was like in 1931.
That's right, and monster movies, even though they're pretty common nowadays, or horror movies, I'll put it that way. They weren't normal in 1931. Bela Lugosi's Dracula, I believe, was the one that started it all. And go ahead.
I was going to say that's absolutely true. Dracula is really the first sound horror film. And you're talking about being, a few years into the sound era. And even though it was a hit, most people didn't think it was a good idea to continue making films, of that type. And that's the story I tell about Junior Laemmle, the 23-year-old who's running Universal at the time, and his vision to make these films.
And how close do you feel you got to Junior Laemmle's actual persona? Because he died long before, I guess, you and I were born.
Oh, well, not before. He died after I was born, but he kind of died. I hate to say the word obscurity. He lived until 1977. His father died in 1936,
That's
But the
what.
last the Lemleys lose his father, Carl Lemley Sr., created Universal, founded the studio, everything to do with it, and ran the studio up until he put Junior in charge in 1929. And then they both, the Lemleys lost the studio in 1936. Senior dies a couple years later. Junior lives for another 40 years, but he does very little. He does nothing in the film business. And that was sort of part of the detective search of this, was trying to find anything about him. And he's really kind of been lost to history to a great deal. And that's kind of the one of the things that attracted me to writing the story, because I found him a fascinating character, and I tried to do as best I could to recreate what I thought he was like. What was interesting was he was so young when he was put in charge of the studio, and so many of the other studio heads of the time were older than him. So he's very much a product of the roaring 20s. And so that was what was really fun, was reading interviews with him in the newspapers from then. He talks very much with 20s lingo, and
Hmm.
he really wanted to appeal. He wanted to make bigger films than his father made. And he also, one of the first things he did was he did this series called The Collegians, which was about college life in the 20s. And it was a very popular serial, and Junior was behind that. So he very much was looking for a younger voice when he first started out.
Now, you personify Junior. I mean, you can really tell. I mean, like, I remember one time he was climbing into a car and he asked his driver about something if it was ready, and he says "aces," and I'm like, well, that's the way people talked back in those days, or like almost like a jazz baby type of person.
Well, that's what kind of excited me when I was able to find interviews with him from the time he talked like that. There's one interview in particular in the New York Times where he uses phrases like "I'm all about this," just very much very contemporary 20s talk, which was very different than what you heard coming from the other studio heads. And I thought that that was really fun about him, that he really encapsulated his age, where so many, a lot of the stars of the period did, but once he usually got to the front office, they were kind of a little bit more staid older men, and where Junior was very much like sort of a young energetic guy who was in charge of a studio at 21.
See, that's what I didn't realize he was that young when he took over Universal.
It was his 21st birthday present from his father.
That's right, and he his even though his father did not want to make Dracula,
Nope.
right, didn't want to make Frankenstein because I think you say in the book, who wants to watch a movie about bringing back the dead.
Exactly. His father was completely against the films, and there's a great interview with his father a couple of years after those films were both big, huge hits, and the monster cycle was sort of launched, where his father freely admits that Junior was the only one that wanted to make them, and he was opposed to them, and clearly they're big hits, and it's what people want to see.
You also have some interaction between Junior Lemley and James Whale, and I've always looked upon James Whale as a character. Um, how much of a truth is there in those interactions?
Well, I mean, he did hire him. James Whale came to Hollywood and was very sought after, and Junior was able to land him. So there's truth in that. I mean, he worked for Universal for many years. Pretty much all the great films that James Whale made were all made during his time at Universal. He made some afterwards, but none of them are near as famous as his monster movies and the other films that he made for Universal.
Yeah, that was something which, I mean, Universal became known as the stock and trade for monster movies. I mean, you had Dracula, you had Frankenstein. Did they do the Invisible Man, that
They
studio?
did. That's also James Whale.
Yes, that's what I thought. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I imagine Carl Laemmle Jr. had a hand in that also.
Oh, all of it. I mean, all of those films that were made, the five films that sort of are credited with starting the cycle were all made when Junior was running the studio, and they're by far the best. I mean, I love all of them. The entire cycle, which really runs from 31 to 57, is just fantastic. But the five that were made while Junior was running the studio, without a doubt, are the best. And he put more money behind them. James Whale directed three of the first five. So, there was a lot of really great talent there.
What got you interested in this story? Because I know your previous works, with Justice Girl, with about the power of early TV, and no cameras allowed. I mean, that was about your work, wasn't it? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah, that was my 80s career as a teenager, smuggling camera equipment into rock and roll concerts. Very different, but I guess you could say it was kind of my same sort of youthful thing, like Junior, sort of just going for it. So I think that's maybe I feel a kinship to Junior when I was that age. That's what really attracted me to the story. I grew up a fan of the films, making the model kits in the 70s and all that, and then kind of drifted away from them. And then in the late 90s I saw them again after I'd been working in the film business for a while, and I just had a very different take on them seeing them as an adult. And I started to research it, and my initial idea was I thought it was fascinating that you had this iconic character of Frankenstein, but it was played by all these different actors. And I thought, oh, there might be a story there. But when I delved into it, I ended up, when I discovered this whole thing, the back and forth between Karloff and Lugosi to play Frankenstein originally, which then led me to Junior. That's when the story really took off for me. Just discovering Junior Lemley was really that all of this had been launched by such a young person who was so different than what was going on in with the rest of Hollywood at the time. That's what really drew me to it.
so if he was 21 when he took over the studio, and that was after Dracula was made.
No, no, no.
Oh,
Dracula.
what?
No, he made Dracula. Universal had made Hunchback of Notre Dame and Phantom of the Opera before Junior was running the
Okay.
studio, which some people sort of they lump it in with the monster movies, even though it's not really part of the cycle that begins with Dracula. But no, Junior was the one had been running the studio for several years when they made Dracula, and was the one that fought to make that film.
Oh, okay. That's what I was trying to get my chronology straight there.
Yeah,
So I remember watching Phantom of the Opera and just fantastic with
yeah,
Lon Chaney,
yeah.
and a lot of people don't realize that Universal was looking for a Lon Chaney replacement because Chaney had died
Hmm.
due to lung cancer, but because he was going to be the original Dracula,
Right.
and
Uh,
go ahead.
he was gonna play Dracula, and that's why Todd Browning, one of the reasons he was brought in to direct it, is that he had done other films with Lon Chaney. Then Lon Chaney passed away, and they scrambled and went and they found Bela Lugosi after, as Bela said famously, after they auditioned everybody and their dog, they went with Bela, which was crazy because Bela had become a semi-star from playing Dracula on stage.
Right.
So it's so unusual, but he wasn't a movie star, and so they were trying out all these different actors to play the role that they considered better as a movie star, and it was a sound film. So ironically, they may have had issues with his accent, which has become such a part of whenever anybody does Dracula, they do Bela Lugosi's Hungarian
Oh,
accent.
exactly. And you even write with a Hungarian dialect with instead of W's he says V's, like
Yeah.
what is what, and that's what I found really entertaining about the book. You also, I mean, and people seem to forget this, but Bela, it was Karloff and Lugosi, and Lugosi was going to do it, like you said, up until 3 days before the movie was made, or is
Well,
that part of
it,
literary license?
well, no. In the beginning of the book, I have a series of quotes from the newspaper. All of those are real. Those aren't made up. So initially, he was announced about 6 months before the film was going to be made that he was going to be Frankenstein. Then there's an article about 2 to 3 months before it starts shooting, where it says Lugosi has begged out of Frankenstein. And then the final piece of evidence, which shows you how it was still very much back and forth towards the end, is there's a letter that James Whale wrote to Colin Clive, who plays Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Frankenstein, that was written 2 weeks before the start of production, that was given to Colin Clive when he arrived in America. He came over, he was an English actor, and he came over to be in it. So when he arrives in New York, he's handed this letter from James Whale, sort of with a copy of the script saying, welcome to America. We're going to make this film together. And he says in the letter very famously, and playing the part of the monster will be either Bela Lugosi or Boris Karloff. So here's a letter from the film's director saying 2 weeks before the film is about to start production, they still haven't decided who's going to play the role of the monster.
And Karloff, for everybody knows Boris Karloff now.
Mhm.
I mean, back here in 2022, people know Boris Karloff like when it comes to monster movies as well as they know their own name. But back in 1931, like you mentioned in your book, Karloff was down to his last $19.
Yeah, so he was definitely a struggling actor. That specific thing is creative license.
Right,
That's
right. That's a,
it was, but he was definitely living from paycheck to paycheck. He had one of the things that is very funny, if you want to sort of give to show how his career changed after Frankenstein. If you look at him in Frankenstein and then Bride of Frankenstein, his face is considerably fleshier
mhm.
because he had become successful and he was eating
He's
better.
eating better.
So, so one of the things that initially got him the role was that wonderful gaunt face that he had when times were a little tougher. And to give another example, he was working here or there as an actor, but the first film that comes out after he shoots Frankenstein, he'd already shot it before filming Frankenstein, but it comes out right afterwards. His character is listed as waiter. He doesn't even have a name. His character is just waiter. So it just shows the type of roles he was getting,
Well, in
before.
Frankenstein, at the beginning of the movie, he's not even billed. It's just a
Yeah,
question mark.
yeah. I think some of that was for I mean, he wasn't a star yet,
Right.
but it was also for the sort of the mystery of it. Ooh, is it real? Is it not? But very quickly, as I've been getting ready, preparing for the book to come out, which is soon in the next few days,
Mm-hmm.
I've been posting things on social media, and there's a great picture of the front of a movie theater from about 8 or 9 months after Frankenstein has come out, which is for the Mummy. And the biggest thing you can see in that whole thing is the word Karloff.
Yes.
Right? It's the size of almost the entire marquee. It just says Karloff. So he very quickly became very famous from the role of Frankenstein.
He enters into the realm of people known by one name, like Elvis and
Yeah.
Prince. You
And,
know, and, you
and
know,
also an interesting thing, just where it was such a change in the coming out of this. Lugosi was never as famous again as he was when he
mhm.
was a star from initially a star from Dracula, and their careers kind of went in two different directions. And Karloff never stopped being a star from the moment that Frankenstein took off.
And Karloff, I mean, he was a, excuse me, like you said, he was almost chosen in desperation because they were hoping to get Lugosi. That's the
Well,
feeling I got from your book.
yeah, I mean, well, that's kind of what I decided when I was telling the story, when because there's that letter saying that they were going back and forth, and I sort of went that direction because part of the story was that and I was sort of using this, that they wanted Leslie Howard to play the part of
Mhm.
Dr. Frankenstein because he had become a star at MGM. MGM turned him down for a loan out, so then they went with Colin Clive, who was not really known in America. So there is a belief that there was a movement at that time to go after Lugosi because he was kind of a name, since they weren't going to have this name of Leslie Howard.
And also, let's talk a little bit about James Whale again, because in your book you mentioned like there's a conversation between Carl Lemley Jr. and Whale. He kind of springs the news on Whale unexpectedly that it's going to be Karloff instead of Lugosi, and Whale had threatened to walk off, threatened to walk out of the movie because he'd already set up all the shots.
Right. Whale, from everything you read about him, was very meticulous. And, if the thing that really elevates the films that he made, particularly the three monster films that he makes, is just how beautifully they're planned out. The choice of camera angles really elevates the material, and the sense of humor that he brought to it, and just the overall feel of them. And that very much came from the preparation that he put into it. And I felt that somebody like that would not react well to a lot of back and forth just days before a film is shooting. So that's what I tried to convey in the story, that all of this back and forth, would wreak havoc with somebody who was really kind of a genius and had really planned what he wanted to do with the film.
In your research, when they were actually shooting the movie, was there a tight lid kept on the movie, so nothing really got out about it, about who's starring or anything like that?
Well, you do see a lot, gossip was around then. There wasn't the same thing like today because you didn't have social media.
Right.
There was radio and a handful of columns, which, Luella Parsons is a character
Hmm.
in my story, who would disseminate information, but it wasn't like today where, people were trying to take pictures and things like that. But they definitely the first record ever that Karloff is going to be the monster is a press release that comes out on the day that they start shooting. So that's really the first thing in the press again, which is another quote that I use in the book.
After Frankenstein and after the Universal years, like you said, Carl Laemmle Jr. He just sort of faded away. Um, did he die penniless?
No, it seems that the best that I can tell is I think he was comfortable, which may have been one of the reasons why he didn't work for 40 years. They definitely sold the home. They had this big mansion up in the hills in Beverly Hills that they had bought from Tom Ince. The family had for a long time. Carl Sr. and company stayed on the East Coast where most of the business was, and then when he would come out here, they would stay in hotels and stuff. Finally, the kids, Junior and his sister, convinced him to buy a house. They bought this huge house so they would use that when they were living, whenever they were in town here. And Junior lived there at various times. And it looks like the house was sold in the 50s or the 60s. And then I actually have a letter. I collect stuff on Junior Lemley because it's kind of like a detective thing, finding stuff. And I actually have a letter that somebody had mailed to his house in 1977. And this is a letter that they sent back to the person saying, we're really sorry, he just passed away. And at this point, he's living on Tower Drive in Beverly Hills, which I think was a nice but relatively modest home in the hills in
Hmm.
Beverly Hills.
What's next for you, for Julian David Stone? What is next for you?
Well, I have another novel I'm about halfway through that has to do with the space race, the Apollo program of the 1960s. That's another huge passion of mine. So I'm hoping to follow that up with, follow this with that. And then right now, since the book comes out in just a few days, I'm pretty busy, doing publicity for that. And then, I've got some signings and things like that. And then hopefully I'll get some time and I'll sit down and finish the other novel and, you know, uh, see where that leads me. And obviously, I think this would make a wonderful movie. And as my background originally was as a screenwriter, so hopefully, if that comes to fruition, maybe that'll keep me busy for a while.
See, and this is what I like to have fun with. I mean, it seems like it's so much. It I was having fun reading the book because I knew some of the stories that went into the making of Frankenstein, like with the special effects and how he got his they got his head to light up, and but the filming itself was really, you've got a lot more research than I've got on there.
Yeah, I just, I love the back and forth. I love this 23-year-old running a movie studio, the era, a big part of it also, which we haven't talked about, but I touch upon
Hmm.
in the book, is that you're only a couple years into the sound era. So
Right.
that, people are still figuring out what the hell is a sound film. The what we think of as a sound film today, when sound first came in 27 and then really explodes with the jazz singer, but then in 28 when they start making them, nobody really knew what a sound movie was. What do people want? Music? Do they want sound effects? Do they want just dialogue, no sound effects, or do they want sound effects and dialogue? So what we think of as the relationship between all those different elements in a film really doesn't get firmly established until about 32 or 33. Like if you look at a film from 1932 or 33, you go, okay, this looks old, but I recognize the way that sound comes up with the title, and then
Hmm.
when a character's in the distance, he's quieter. All these little rules that we take for granted are really being established during this period of time. Because if you look at the first sound films from 28, there's some that just have a few sound effects, and no dialogue. Like nobody really knew exactly what a sound movie would be. So that's part of the story too. They're still trying to figure all of that out.
Wasn't Frankenstein, and Frankenstein also had an intro to it
Right.
that I've never seen done before or since,
Yeah.
where the gentleman comes out. I believe it was James Whale himself who came out, and was that James Whale?
No, no, oh God, the actor Sloan,
Everett
who
Sloan. Okay, yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah, who plays a character in it. Yeah, he gives a warning to the audience. Some of it that was done to sort of get people excited. I mean, that was one of the things I also loved, was that the Lemleys were particularly, and the father particularly, loved the type of thing of like parking an ambulance in front of the movie theater with nurses to to sort of dare people to come in and see it. He was really kind of the master of that kind of schmaltzy, fun hyperbole. So that was another aspect of the story that I really enjoyed.
I tell you what, Julian David Stone, I appreciate you taking time tonight. The book is called It's Alive, and it comes out, I believe, we're taping this on May. We're taping it. Isn't that great? Shows you how old I am. We're recording
Yeah.
this on May 12th, but it comes out, I believe, on May 17th.
Comes out on May 17th, just a few days from now. You can get it Amazon, anywhere you want. If you want, you can read the first chapter for free at my website, juliandavidstone.com, and I hope people will check it out. I'm very pleased with how it's gone over so far. People are really getting, which was my number one goal, which was to make it fun. You know,
Fantastic. Well, Julian, thank you again for being on the show tonight.
oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.